I still remember the sound of my uncle's laughter, sharp, cruel, echoing through the dining room as everyone else joined in. He pointed at the medal in my hand and said, "They must have given you that for typing fast, huh?" No one defended me. Not my aunt, not even my cousin. The room was filled with laughter, and I sat there quiet, gripping the box that held 20 years of silence. They didn't know that the night I earned that medal, 47 men almost died. They didn't know that the man now laughing at me was the reason I was branded a failure. My name is Arden Hayes, and this is the story of how the truth finally spoke for itself. The air in Port Haven always carried that heavy salt smell, thick, damp, and impossible to wash off. It clung to me the moment I stepped out of the car, seeping into my sleeves, my hair, the folds of a coat that hadn't seen this town in 20 years. I hadn't planned on coming back. Not after the silence that followed me out of this place. Not after the looks that said more than words ever could. But there are moments when choice feels like an illusion. Leo's ceremony was one of them. The hall was packed with veterans, flags, and proud applause. He stood on the stage, his smile honest, wide, unguarded. When his eyes found mine at the back row, he froze just for a second, surprise, maybe, or disbelief that I'd actually come. Later that night, the whole family gathered at Marcus's house. The lights were too bright, the laughter too loud. Every word from my uncle had the weight of someone who'd never questioned himself. He lifted his glass, caught sight of me, and grinned. Look who decided to show up. Must be nice to get a night off from pushing paper. Laughter spilled like cheap wine. I didn't bother correcting him. Instead, I sat at the far end of the table, away from the light, and set a small wooden box beside my plate. Inside lay the medal I never wore. Marcus noticed it immediately. "That thing, what's it for?" "Fastest typist in the Navy." More laughter. I didn't move. My gaze drifted past him to the dark line of the ocean beyond the window. Each wave caught the moonlight, each one tugging at something buried deep inside me. Not shame. Memory. There was a night when I pressed a single button and changed everything. A choice that saved lives and ruined mine. I turned back to Marcus, steady, unflinching. "Some things," I said quietly, "aren't meant to be shown off." He chuckled, but his laughter faltered halfway. Something in my eyes must have told him he'd finally hit a wall he couldn't climb. The bass hummed like a living machine, a low, constant thrum that kept my hands steady and my mouth shut. Headphones snug, screens blinking streams of numbers. This was where the world narrowed to a single task: keep the line clean between shore and the men at sea. SEAL Bravo 6 spoke through the static, urgency in every clipped syllable. "Blue Station, hold the line," they warned. Then metal clashed, breathing hitched, and the feed went red. "Compromise detected. 30 seconds to countermeasure." 29 on the clock. Felt like forever. The rule book sat heavy in my head. No one disconnects unilaterally. The men out there were more than protocol. They were flesh and names I'd never meet. If I stayed, the enemy would triangulate their position. If I cut, the team would vanish into silence, and suspicion would fall on me. I closed my eyes and hit disconnect. The monitors went black. The room became a vault for my pulse. Minutes later, the intercom barked the words I feared most: "Unit Bravo 6 lost contact." I held my hand on the console, as if anchoring myself. 2 weeks of closed-door hearings followed, voices full of accusation and facts corralled into official phrasing. "You disconnected out of procedure," they said. I answered simply that I thought they were being tracked. A week after reassignment, an unmarked envelope appeared on my desk. Inside, a single line: "Your decision saved 47 lives. CT." Beneath it, a medal stamped classified. I wrapped it in cloth and locked it away. I never wore it. Reed told me to stay. "You did the right thing," he said, like a prayer meant to steady me. 3 days later, a storage facility exploded, testing grounds for the very comms gear that had failed. Official reports blamed a technical fault. I knew better. The supplier name traced back to Advanced Solutions. At his funeral, whispers were knives. My mother-in-law called me a curse. Marcus said if I had kept quiet, none of this would have happened. I left that night, the town shrinking in the rear view, as if it had never held me. 10 hours of highway and a silent radio later, I started over in a place where no one knew the price I'd paid for that one impossible choice. I kept to the shadowed end of the table, wine long since cold, watching Marcus perform his stories like a man rehearsing his best lines. His voice filled the room, proud and loud, painting Leo as the family's big moment, while he smirked at me with the ease of someone who never expects a consequence. People laughed, plates clinked. I let the noise wash over me and studied the seam of the tablecloth instead of meeting anyone's eyes. Then the door opened, and the room changed. Admiral Thorne filled the doorway in a way no one else could. The room stilled on him for a single breath. Even the laughter seemed to hold. He moved through the crowd with a steady, polite nod, but when his gaze met mine, it was like a current, electric and old. Marcus, beaming, stepped forward to introduce him and boasted loudly about the ceremony. When Thorne turned back toward the table, his tone dropped, precise and cold. "That's classified, sir." Silence snapped into place. The laughter died mid-breath. Forks stopped. Conversations froze. Marcus's smile thinned into an awkward edge. Leo, entering behind the Admiral, went white and whispered a name that had been kept between men and time, Cerulean Deep. The word slid across the table and landed in my lap like an accusation and an absolution at once. I felt Leo's eyes, felt the weight of that recognition settle. I wanted to tell him to stop, to let the night be what it had to be, but the moment had already tipped. After everyone left, I stepped onto the porch and found Thorne beside me, beneath a sky that tasted of salt and distance. He did not pretend ignorance. He said simply that he could not let Marcus's words stand. I told him he had only made things worse. He only answered that some truths deserved protection until someone was ready to hold them. The night kept its mouth shut, and the ocean listened while Leo came close enough for the porch light to map his face. He held the new metal awkwardly, like a talisman he didn't fully trust. He asked if Operation Cerulean Deep was real, if the stories about the signal cut were true. I didn't deny it. I warned him that some burdens are chosen, not given, and that keeping a secret can be a kind of mercy for those who cannot carry it. He told me his generation needed to know who did the hard things. And for the first time in years, I felt the steady flame of something I had misplaced. Morning brought a call from Thorne. He told me Marcus had requested access to old contract files under the pretense of routine review. He admitted he had suspected as much for years and feared what dredging the past might accomplish. He sent a scan, Advanced Solutions Antenna Encryption Contract, 2004. My uncle's signature, stark across the page. The paper felt smaller than the accusation it carried. That evening, a text arrived from an unknown number. "Better leave Port Haven. Don't make me haul the past out for you." The initials read MV. I deleted it without replying, opened the little wooden box, and watched my metal catch the lamplight. I thought about the night I cut the line and the men who came home because of it. My silence had kept them safe once. Now the silence would not save the man who laughed at me. 2 days after the brink of whatever I thought was closure, a heavy brown envelope waited on my stoop like a verdict. No return address. Inside, a photocopy of a contract. Supplier, circled in red, Vance. Solutions, 2004. My uncle's signature was unbearably familiar. The paper felt colder than the porch light. I called Thorne and listened while rain began to stitch across the windows. He did not soften the edges. He had suspected the device was the leak. My disconnect had cut exactly the signal that device broadcasted. If I hadn't acted, his men would have been exposed. He would reopen Cerulean Deep, he said, but only with proof. Hard proof. I asked him plainly if he would be willing to take down my family if that proof pointed at them. He answered that he would not let the honor of 47 men be traded for a ledger. That afternoon, Leo turned up, cheeks raw from running, a USB and a sheath of memos trembling on his palm. He had cracked into the company archive and pulled internal notes, acknowledged antenna flaws, directives to sign off anyway to keep the contract. He knew the stakes. He also knew the cost to his career. He said he could not be complicit in buying silence. I put a hand on his shoulder and felt the same stubbornness I'd felt 20 years ago. Later, Thorn warned that when the past is churned, it drags everything in its path. I looked at the black line of the sea and told him I had spent my life in that churn. Let it come. The storm arrived hard, wind battering the eaves as headlights carved lines across the room. Marcus stood in the doorway, rain beating on his shoulders, breath smelling of whiskey and fury. He accused, he threatened. He tried to make my fear his currency. Do you want to drag this family down? He shouted, his voice a flint. He slapped his palm on the table like a judge delivering sentence and warned that money and connections would bury whatever I'd found. I told him I had acted where he had chosen profit over people. He scoffed that paper would not hurt him. That power made him untouchable. My answer was quiet and even. He might have money, but I had the truth. And the truth was no longer classified by his willingness to buy silence. Before his words could find purchase, boots sounded in the hall. Thorn stepped in with 2 uniformed officers. The investigation, having moved faster than Marcus expected. Allegations were read. Cuffs clicked. Marcus screamed that we were liars. I said only that his decisions had consequences that reached beyond his ledger. When they carried him away, the rain softened into a hush. Leo asked if I was all right. I told him the peace we chase sometimes arrives only after someone finally speaks the truth. Thorn stood under the porch light and, without drama, said that the classification he invoked earlier had been a shield, until the person beneath it was ready to stand in the light. For the first time in a long while, I believed I was. I never imagined I'd walk through the gates of the Washington Navy Yard again. The air still carried the same sterile chill, the faint scent of polished brass and oil. 20 years ago, I left this place branded as a woman who disobeyed orders. Now I returned, not in uniform, but as a ghost of that moment, carrying a truth that refused to stay buried. The hearing chamber was paneled in dark oak, the lighting too warm for the cold purpose it served. At one end of the table sat Admiral Thorn, composed, unreadable, his ribbons glinting under the light. Across from him, Marcus Vance waited, pale beneath his expensive suit, fingers drumming the table as though he could still dictate the rhythm of every room he entered. I was called last. Marcus's attorney stood, voice polished and confident. He recited my record, every charge, every reprimand, until the room was filled with the sound of my past. Then came the question, was it true I'd accused my own uncle of sabotaging a Navy contract without proof? I said I had proof. A survivor who could verify it. They asked who, and I turned toward Thorn. All eyes followed. The silence swelled until Thorn's voice cut clean through it. He said I had saved 47 men, that my choice had prevented an ambush. The lawyer pressed again, demanding why, if that were true, my file was still marked as disciplinary. Thorn didn't blink. Because it's still classified, he said. The words fell, heavy, final. The air tightened. Even the ceiling seemed to drop closer. Marcus shot to his feet, shouting that I wanted revenge, that this was all a setup. I faced him and said I had kept quiet for 20 years to protect the Vance name. But when family used silence as a weapon, it was no longer loyalty. It was surrender. The presiding officer struck the gavel, announcing a review for partial declassification. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor, and walked toward the door. Behind me, Thorn's footsteps echoed steadily. He said I'd done enough. I didn't look back when I answered that this wasn't enough. Not yet. For the first time in decades, I was no longer surviving. I was finally beginning to live. A month after the hearing, a package arrived from the Department of the Navy. The envelope was gray, sealed in red wax, its weight far greater than paper should carry. Across the front, in bold black print, were the words, Operation Cerulean Deep, Declassified Level 2. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. The first page was simple, clinical. It read, actions taken by civilian code officer prevented compromise and saved 47 Navy personnel. Signed, Admiral Thorne. No mention of my name, no acknowledgement of the woman who had been called insubordinate, reckless, and unfit. Yet I smiled. That was how gratitude looked in a world where thank yous were buried under layers of clearance codes. Later that afternoon, Leo came by. He was out of uniform, his shirt wrinkled, his expression older than his years. He told me Marcus had been stripped of all authority at Advanced Solutions and that federal prosecution was underway. I nodded. The news didn't surprise me. He said he couldn't understand how someone could fall so far from their own pride. I told him pride was a fragile thing, too much of it, and a man would mistake it for worth. He stood there for a long time, searching my face, as though trying to measure the cost of my choices. I told him I once believed silence was sacrifice, but now I knew speaking was sometimes the only way left to protect what mattered. He reached out and took my hand, promising to defend me, as I had defended others. I laughed softly and told him he didn't need to. There are some battles that end the moment you stop hiding. When he asked what I had left after everything, I said, peace. The kind that comes not from winning, but from finally being understood. That night, the radio carried a short segment on the investigation into retired Navy contractor Marcus Vance. I turned it off halfway through. Outside, the sea whispered against the rocks. In the rhythm of the waves, I could almost hear the faint click of old transmissions. The sound of men breathing, alive, because a signal had gone dark. The past was finally quiet. And so was I. A year passed before I returned to Port Haven. The town smelled the same, salt, pine, and memory. Summer light lay across the water like gold leaf, soft and endless. I walked the shoreline where it had all begun, the wooden box heavy in my hand. The tide came in slow, breathing in rhythm with my steps, as if it had been waiting for me to come back. I stopped at the spot where Marcus once laughed, where I'd set the metal down in silence and left it untouched for decades. The sea hadn't changed. Only I had. I knelt in the sand and opened the box. The metal caught the sun and burned brighter than I remembered, as if it had been waiting for air after years of being buried. For the first time, I pinned it to my chest. The clasp clicked softly, a small sound, but it filled the empty space between the waves. It wasn't pride that brought it out. It was the quiet knowing that I had kept faith when no one believed me, that I had done what was right when the world called it wrong. An old veteran walked by, his cane marking steady prints in the sand. He paused, nodded at the metal, and said it was beautiful, that I must have done something brave. I smiled and told him, not brave. Just necessary. He gave a little nod, the kind of understanding that passes between those who have carried things too heavy to explain, and continued down the beach. The sun sank lower, tinting the horizon copper. Each wave rolled forward, broke, and dissolved, like the sound of a secret finally exhaled. I thought of Reed then, of his laugh, of the way he used to steady my hands when I doubted myself. I whispered to him that we'd made it, that the story had finally found its end. The evening breeze shifted, carrying the clean, sharp scent of the sea. I unpinned the metal, held it one last time, then placed it back in the box. The lid closed with a soft click. Not an ending, but a seal. A promise kept. I no longer needed to hide it, and I no longer needed to show it. When I turned to leave, the sky was half gold, half shadow. The sound of the ocean followed me, gentle, persistent, alive. It was the same sound that had once filled the radio room 20 years ago. Only now, I heard it for what it was. The sound of silence with a heartbeat. The sound of peace finding its voice.